friends. Welcome back to the podcast. We're excited that you're back with us. Today we're talking about, I think, a really interesting topic and one that might change some things for you. So we're looking at today is how to change how you remember, which is really fascinating, right? Because so many of us think that our life is shaped by what happened to us in the past. But neuroscience actually suggests that our life is shaped by how we remember what happened in the past. And every time you remember something, you're reconstructing that memory, which means you can change it. And it's really cool because it really has felt like in our lifetime, so Coleman and I are looking at 40 this year, in our lifetime, neuroscience has gone from your brain is like mature and developed at a certain age and not able to grow past that. Like I remember learning that in school.
Right.
And it's changed to your brain is more like
neuroplasticity.
I wasn't looking for that one, but that's a good one too. But it's more pliable than they ever knew. And the way that it can change even as you age is really incredible. So we're talking about maybe how you can change how you remember so that you can begin to reshape the stories of your past. I actually just read a fiction novel. Kristen Hanna is one of my favorite authors. She writes a lot of historical fiction. And I just read a recent one by her called The Winter Garden. It's not a new book, it's an older one. But the story is of a mother who went through World War II in the Soviet Union under Stalin's rule or reign. And she had an incredibly traumatic past. She did end up surviving all of it, ended up in the United States, and ended up starting a new life. But then she had two daughters in this new life of hers that she held at like beyond arm's distance. She was cold, she didn't engage, she really didn't mother them. And so the story, and if you're going to read the book, I'm sorry, spoiler alert. But the story goes through and these girls are like, Mom doesn't love us, right? So they're growing up with this major mother wound. And then eventually, and it's like the father that holds the girls and the family together. Eventually Dad dies first. And his final request is that Mom tells her story. And in the end, over many months, the mother finally tells her story to her daughters, and her daughters are able to go back through their childhood and understand their mother's response. Like one of the daughters got on a train to go to a sporting event, and the mother turned and walked away. Didn't say goodbye, didn't say I love you, good luck, I'll miss you, all the things you would expect a mother to say. She just walked away. Because for her, she had to put a child on a train during the World War II and never see that child again. And so she couldn't hang in that moment, and her daughter never knew the story to know. So anyway, long story short, the mother tells the story and her girls are able to rewrite their memories. They were able to understand why their mother did that, and in the final days of her life, they were able to rebuild that relationship. And it's not because the circumstances changed. It's because they were able to rewrite their memories. And now, yes, that's a fiction story. But the reality is we can all do that, which is pretty wild.
Yeah, so, a few questions to kind of kick us off here that you might have thought or you might have heard someone ask before. So why did two people experience the same event but end up with completely different conclusions? Or maybe it was a catalyst event. Maybe it was a life-altering event, and they end up with completely different lives. Right. How's that possible?
I mean, even your siblings, when you chat with your siblings about like the childhood they had or how they experienced your parents growing up, like it is wild how different those stories are. And you're like, we grew up in the same house. And if you're close in age with your sibling, you're like, I was there. I was there for that. My brother actually, I think he'd be fine with me sharing this. And you can tell me later. But he was a pretty aggressive and unkind brother as a young boy. And there's so many memories I have that I'll share with him that I remember him doing to me, and he'd be like, I don't remember that. Now, I think he was like emotionally charged in those moments, so it's possible that he didn't register them. But truly, like same childhood, same house, we were both there. I know I couldn't have done those things myself. And like, I remember him, he does it. So it is wild when you think about how our memory works.
Another question here is, why do some people stay stuck in events that happened decades ago, right? So you spend time with them, you hang out, you do things in the present moment, but they find themselves always talking about the past or talking about this traumatic thing that happened to them or this really hard thing that they've never gotten over or they've never moved on from. Why does that happen to people?
Or the really good thing, like the person that won the championship. But
yeah, where like the good times are past. There's nothing to look forward to, right? It's all in the past.
The golden days.
The golden years are over.
Yeah.
How about this one? Why can one moment from childhood still shape how you show up in your work, in your marriage, and even as a parent today? How does that happen? We're going to answer all these questions today in this episode. So one of the things that we want to challenge you with, and just a thought for you to like noodle on and consider, it's not the event that keeps you stuck. It's not the thing that happened. It's not the catalyst. It's not the trauma. It's not the terrible thing, the thing that maybe you still need to grieve. It's the story your brain built around the event that's keeping you stuck.
A lot of times it's what you made that event mean. And we talk about that a lot with our kids. Like, what are you making this mean? Or we'll talk about, like, let's say we're getting after our kids for something and you can pause and you can see that their reaction, like, oh, they're taking it in, and they look like they're taking it in on a more intense level than maybe I intended. So Coleman and I will both stop and we'll be like, hey, what did you just make that mean? What did you say about yourself when I said those words? Because it happens where you're upset, you say some things, and you can just see that shift in your partner, in your child, that you're like, oh, they took that and that struck deep because they turned it into something deeper or more intense than you meant it to be.
So here's what we're going to talk about today, just so you have kind of a roadmap of where we're going. We are going to talk about how memory actually works. We're going to discuss why your brain keeps replaying old stories, the stories from 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And we're going to talk about how, this is the powerful one, this is the exciting one, how to change the story without denying what happened.
That's important.
You can change the story that you tell yourself without denying what happened.
Yeah, this isn't pretending, or it isn't writing a story that just makes you feel better to feel better, right? You still have to honor what happened in the moment.
Yeah.
But you definitely can rewrite what you make it mean.
So let me give you an example. So two kids get cut from the same sports team, right? So they go to try out, they don't make the team. Two different kids. One kid tells themselves the story, I'm not athletic, and they stop trying sports. They just like, I'm not athletic, I'm not going to play sports anymore, I'm going to go do this other thing. That's literally a story that they're telling themselves. Do we know whether they're athletic, whatever that means? A lot of the professional sports players and Olympic athletes, people would have looked at them before they made it there to that place and said, oh, you're not very athletic. And yet here they are at the top of their game. So the other kid, right? The story that he or she tells themselves when they get cut from the team, I need to practice more. And then they just become more determined to do what they want to do. Same event, different story, they end up with a different identity. And ultimately, they just end up with different action. They're showing up differently, so they're going to create a different result in their life. This doesn't just happen with sports, it happens with relationships, parenting, rejection, failure, and even trauma. Events don't determine your identity, stories do. So let me give you an example of two men I know. I know these guys personally. Their identities will remain anonymous to protect their privacy, but one had a loving family with two parents, lots of relationships with relatives. So lots of people involved in their lives. Uncles, aunts, cousins. Surrounded by people who loved them, supported them, cared for them. Tons of parental support. Ended up doing drugs, destroying his marriage, and landing in a drug abuse recovery facility. So the ingredients of that man's life, if you were observing from the outside, you would say he had everything a kid could want or need. Ends up blowing up his life. That doesn't make any sense. Different man who I know personally had a dad who never recovered from Vietnam and was distant and mostly disappointed in his son. His mom was an alcoholic and his parents were divorced. He split time between his alcoholic mom, his distant dad, and literally evil stepmother. Some of the stories I've heard about the stepmother, you would think that's Cinderella's mom. a stepmom. This man ended up getting married, creating a beautiful life for his wife and kids, and today is one of the most thoughtful, considerate people I know. How is that possible? Well, I'm going to give you the answer. Because at the end of the day, these men both told themselves a story. And in most cases, they told themselves lots of different stories about who they were, who they are, what their identity is, what they're capable of, right? How they feel about themselves, what they think about themselves. They told themselves a story, and that story resulted in the life that they have today. One in a drug recovery facility, one being creating this beautiful life, one of the most thoughtful, considerate people I know. So this is how we know that it's not what happens to you that shapes you.
Right.
It's the story you tell yourself. And we all know, everybody listening to this podcast, we all know people like this. You hear their story, you see their life, and you're like, that doesn't make sense.
Right.
How? But how?
Right, right. Yeah, well, let's take that and let's explore how memory really works. Have you ever asked somebody, maybe a spouse or someone that went through the same experience of you, and asked them how they remembered it, and then paired that up to how you remembered it, and it's like so different? This happens all the time with us, with our kids, one in particular, who this one will tell us how they remembered it, and both of us look at each other and we're like, that's not what we experienced. And so it's fascinating because your brain does not replay memories like a video, even though you kind of experience it like a video in your mind. And so every time you remember something, you are reconstructing it. Your brain is putting it back together. It's taking those blocks, the blocks have been spread out, and it's taking those blocks and it's rebuilding it, which means those blocks might go in different places, different times. And then it starts to blend with past memories, right? So maybe you remember it and it was a sunny day and you were out on a hike, and the next time you remember it and you're like, oh, maybe it was partly cloudy and a little cool, right? Because then your memories start to blend a little bit. Even though you might close your eyes and it's almost like a video recording in your brain, that's not actually how your brain reconstructs it. So it's rebuilt every time. So your current beliefs about yourself and other people influence how you remember the past. And maybe you've had this where I don't know if you've ever had a day where you've woken up and you just feel kind of down. You feel blue. And then you remember something and you remember it with that tainted lens. Or you wake up and you feel so excited and life is so beautiful, and you remember something that was hard from a few days ago and you're like, oh, it wasn't that bad, right? That's how you're currently feeling, which portrays onto that reconstructed memory when it crosses your mind. So this is cool because, like we talked about, your mind is moldable. So it's like, okay, so how can we begin to rewrite our stories to serve us and not to shape identities that don't serve us without dishonoring what actually happened?
Yeah, so here's an example of that, right? If you believe my parents didn't care about me, your brain will highlight memories that confirm that. So if that is a belief that you have, if that is an identity you have, your brain will literally go, oh, got it, understood, I know what I'm supposed to do.
Well, it's like self-protect, right?
Uh-huh.
Self-protect. We're going to pull this one out, and we're going to pull this one out, and this one out, because that's going to build this story of my parents don't care about me.
Yeah. So memories are not fixed. They can be edited every time you recall them. And that is exciting. This means the story you tell yourself about your past does not have to be permanent. If you feel stuck or frustrated in your life right now, so just think about where you are in your life right now. Are you stoked about it? Are you content? Are you discontent? Are you frustrated? Do you feel stuck? There's a 90% chance it's because you're unconsciously, so it's probably not something you're aware of until you listen to this podcast, you're unconsciously telling yourself an old story about your identity that's preventing you from doing what you really want, creating the life you really want, creating the business you really want, the work you really want, the relationship that you really want.
Right. So memories are not fixed. They can be edited every time you recall them. This means that the story you tell yourself about your past isn't permanent. You're not stuck with it. And my hope is that gives you a sense of relief. Like, oh, okay, it doesn't have to keep defining me in this way. I don't have to keep living out of this identity. Now, it's important that we acknowledge that trauma is real. Big T trauma, little t trauma, we all have experienced trauma. And the painful event matters. But again, the interpretation of it can become your prison or it can become your freedom. And if we go back to the two men that Coleman gave examples of before, arguably, both men had trauma in their lives.
Right.
And for one of them, it became his prison.
Yeah.
And for the other, he was able to rewrite his story and step into a different identity.
Yeah.
Which is really powerful. That doesn't remove the trauma. When you talk to both of those men about their past, like the trauma is there, the hurt is there, the pain is there. That hasn't gone away. But the rewriting of the story has absolutely changed the trajectory of their lives.
Yeah, so another kind of example here when you think about an actual trauma, I often think about, parents getting a divorce and the trauma that is for the kids. I personally have no idea how it could not be, because kids' brains and bodies are not fully developed. And so to have the people you're counting on to protect you and to love you and to care for you split, I don't see how that is not a trauma for kids. And so I think it's a very easy one to talk about. But think about the possible stories that child could tell. So they could conclude, I'm hard to love. They could conclude, relationships don't last. They could conclude, my parents did the best they could with the tools they had. They could conclude, that experience made me value stability in relationships. And these examples are brilliant because what we know is kids conclude lots of different things about divorce and about that traumatic experience. And so what I want you to notice is the event stays the same. The divorce, whatever happened and however it happened, is the same. Those facts and those circumstances are real, and we're not denying those. But the meaning changes when you tell yourself a different story. Meaning is what shapes your identity, and your identity is formed by the stories you tell yourself, mostly unconsciously.
Right.
That's why we're doing this podcast, so we can bring it to your awareness so you can be conscious of it.
Yes, and I would say that it's really important that you believe the interpretation that you decide to follow. And so sometimes it takes a ladder to get there. If you've believed something for a long time, right? So if we go back to the example of your parents got a divorce and maybe you settled on the thought unconsciously that I'm hard to love, you likely aren't going to be able to rewrite that memory right away to I'm easy to love, right? That's a giant leap.
Yeah.
So maybe, you stop and you pause and you can rewrite the story to my parents got a divorce, but I'm still lovable.
There you go.
Right? So there's somewhere in between that gets you to where you want to go, because ultimately that divorce between your parents wasn't about you. But it doesn't change that it impacted you as a child that wrote a story that guided your life. And so it's one of those things that it's not affirmations. It's not pretending. It's not making something up to feel better. It's truly re-identifying with the circumstance in a way that serves you better.
Yeah, so let's talk about the unconscious stories that we all have playing in our heads, right? Most stories are invisible. We don't walk around thinking, I'm telling myself a story about abandonment, right? We don't walk around thinking, I'm telling myself a story about how Abby hates me. I don't think that. So they're usually invisible, they're usually unconscious, but instead, here's how these unconscious stories will show up in your life. So I want you to pay attention to these things because these are signals. Fear of conflict, people pleasing, emotional shutdown, overworking, controlling behavior. These are all signals that the story you're telling yourself is probably not a good one. It's probably not a productive one. Probably not a story that's serving you or the people you love the most. The story operates below awareness. So your nervous system's job is to keep you safe, and it doesn't know the difference between physical and emotional danger. Your nervous system is autonomic. That's a clinical term. What it means is that it is operating on your behalf automatically, and autonomic means below the surface of consciousness. It's automatic and you don't know it's happening and you're not in control of it, which means it operates. So I already covered that. Unless you learn how to become aware of it and then you can direct it. That's the work that I do in coaching, is help people become aware of this autonomic system so they can make it self-directed, so they can take control over managing how their nervous system responds. Okay, so for example, a pattern in someone's story could be, I'm not enough, which shows up as perfectionism, needing everyone else's validation, and fear of criticism, right? So if the story you're telling yourself is, I'm not enough, I'm not worthy, it will show up in these ways. These are the signals: perfectionism, needing validation, fear of criticism. And those are just 3 examples of dozens of signals that you could get from that.
Totally. Yeah, let me give you a personal example, and one that I would say that I'm currently rewriting the story of. Last fall, we had a tough semester at the enrichment program we run from a managing staff perspective. So semester, as far as the kid front, the program, all of that was great. But the staff we had on staff in the fall, the team, there you go. It was tough. They ultimately weren't the right fit for our program, caused a lot of turmoil on the back end. And it happened to be the staff I was in charge of and I was leading to the best of my ability. And it was this perfect storm of, this is the first time that I am leading mixed-aged adults as their boss. I have been in leadership roles my entire life, but 9 out of 10 of those have been me leading younger, for the most part, people. So this is the first time everybody but one on staff was actually older than me. And I finished that semester and I felt like I had done a really good job using the coaching skills we had to navigate it. But it still was somewhat traumatic because there was some gaslighting and unkindness, and it was really hard to navigate. And so I had an unconscious story that I was not a good leader and didn't have the skills to do this. And so then I came into this semester with a brand new staff that I was responsible for training with a lot of these unconscious stories. And so the first few weeks, I would share with Coleman, man, I feel like I'm dropping the ball. I don't feel like I'm good at this. I feel like I'm missing the point. I feel like I'm not able to take care of everybody in the way that I think I should, right? So it was writing the story I was telling myself, and that was the experience I was having. Yes. And the staff that we brought on this spring are knocking it out of the park. They're all the right fit. They're all just shining. We finally found our people. So I'm having this positive experience, and yet I'm still having a negative internal experience. And so I would say I'm currently in the process of rewriting my story from the fall, that I'm not a good leader, that I don't have what it takes, to something that is, quite frankly, I believe at this point, more true, which is I am a good leader. I have what it takes, and there's still places that I'm learning and growing, right? So that shift then shifts my experience and how I show up as a leader. Yeah.
That's such a good example of an unconscious story quietly running your life.
Yeah.
Right? Because from the outside, if you got to observe our new team and Abby and the team working together, you would be like, woohoo, we did it. Awesome. The team's knocking it out of the park. Great job. Bravo, applause everyone. But internally, that unconscious story is quietly running Abby's life. It's quietly stealing that joy. It's quietly stealing the celebration. It's quietly taking away any possible chance for Abby to give herself credit or recognition, right? That's super important.
Yeah.
So you can't change a story that you can't see. Right. Or a story that you're not aware of. And so how do you bring that unconscious story to the surface? This is super important. And so Abby is telling you that she's actively bringing the unconscious story to her awareness and then attempting to shift it. So let's start with step 1. How do you bring it to the surface?
Yeah, step 1 for me is journaling. If I am able to take my thoughts that are bouncing around in my brain and put them on paper, that gives me the ability to see what's on repeat, or to see what I am making it mean, even if I don't have all the details. And so by putting my thoughts on paper, usually in the morning, I can see which thoughts are on their way to running my day, and I can decide something different. Or just bringing awareness around that thought means that it doesn't have to run the show. When it comes back, then I decide, no, that's not the direction I'm going. I'm thinking about how I did take care of my team this week, right? So journaling is a huge practice for me to bring to surface the thoughts that are wanting to run the show and that are quietly bouncing around up there.
Yeah, and the specific journal activity that Abby's talking about is one that I use in coaching, which is called a thought download. And it's literally where you just take everything you're thinking in that present moment and get it out of your head on paper. Because when you say journaling, a lot of people are like the diary,
Dear Diary.
like Dear Diary that my kids are going to read, or like my great grandkids are going to read. What does that mean? So we're talking about a thought download. So
it's truly just like what thoughts are running across my brain right now. Yeah. And what you'll notice is initially you're like, nothing. But it's so funny because you have so many thoughts, and then when you go to put them down, you're like, oh, I'm not thinking anything.
So here's a couple of prompts for you if you've never done this before and this feels a bit overwhelming, but you're excited. You're like, I want to bring my story to the surface so that I can have a different meaning, so I can tell myself a different story. So here's a couple of prompts. What happened? Okay, so whatever happened yesterday, a couple hours ago, earlier this morning, last night, what happened is a great prompt. Write it down. What did you make it mean? Okay, so once you've kind of written down, oh, this is what happened. What did you make it mean? So something happened and then you gave it meaning. You told yourself a story. That's a good prompt.
So hold on, let's pause there. So let's just a quick example of those first two steps. You yelled at your kids this morning, right? That happened before breakfast, before anybody's been fed. They came up whining, complaining, fighting, whatever it is. You yelled at your kids this morning. The thought that might be unconsciously bumping around in your head is, I'm a bad parent.
Right.
That's how I started my day. I didn't even hug my kids first before I yelled at them, right? So that's an example of something that happened. What happened? I yelled at my kids this morning. What am I making that mean? I'm a bad parent for all these reasons.
Yeah.
And you can list all the reasons if you need to.
And so now once you see it on paper and it's external to you, you can observe it and you can just ask yourself the question, do I think that's true? And if the answer is yes, I do think I'm a bad parent, go there. Feel those emotions. Let it wash over you and experience what it feels like to think I'm a bad parent. That's a good exercise. Sounds like a lot of emotion, maybe something you want to avoid, but it's actually a great exercise. Or you might look at it, you might look at that thought on paper and go like, that's crazy, I'm not a bad parent.
I'm not a bad parent, but I am tired. I am stressed.
Right.
There's a lot happening behind the scenes, so I'm gonna apologize to my kids. And I'm going to give myself grace because my blood sugar had dropped, I had a lot going on. I had a lot on my mind. And of course, anybody with that on their mind probably wouldn't engage with their kids in the way they hoped.
Yeah, so the examples that Abby just gave you is coming from a prompt that we like to use, which is what else could be true, right? So you identify the thought that's happening unconsciously, I'm a bad parent. And then you ask yourself the question, okay, what else could be true? And so Abby just gave you a bunch of examples of what else could be true. I haven't eaten yet. I'm tired from yesterday. Right? Like,
it's been a stressful week.
It's been a stressful week. All those things could be true. And maybe you're not a bad parent, but maybe you are tired and you're not showing up aligned with your values because you need to take a minute to breathe and take care of yourself.
Well, and here's the cool thing about journaling at some point in your day or early in your day is it gives you the opportunity to redirect. It gives you the opportunity if that scenario happens and you can land on, I'm not a bad parent, but I am feeling really worn out and really short today. That might mean that you can redirect your day. That might mean, for us as a homeschool family, maybe we do less on lessons. Maybe when my kids are like, Mom, can I only do 1 page of math? I think, yeah, but it's not for the reasons you think. It's because I need to navigate 1 less page with you. I don't have the emotional capacity to manage more, right? And so then you get to redirect your day and that story doesn't take over anymore.
Yeah. The other way that you can bring your story to the surface and change it is through coaching. So honestly, for both Abby and I, the way that we have been able to bring probably the majority of our unconscious stories quietly running our lives to the surface is through working with a coach. So I work with a coach, Abby's worked with a coach, and then here's what's cool. We've learned how to self-coach and then coach each other from those experiences. So from those investments in coaching, we've learned the skill of coaching ourselves and coaching each other. And so then we're able to be those coaches for each other. And we still hire and invest in coaches. We don't stop doing that, but it's really cool because now we have that skill. which you will have that skill as well if you hire a coach and learn how to coach yourself. But the power of coaching is that a coach can help you identify those unconscious stories. So maybe you're listening to this podcast episode, you're like, this all sounds great, but also super overwhelming. I don't know what stories are running my life. How do I figure that out?
Even the difference between a story and reality, because we, believe it or not, the stories you're telling yourself most of the time actually feel like reality and truth and just what it is, right? This is just how it is. Even though it's actually a story that can be rewritten, it's a memory that can be rewired, but it feels so true and it feels so real to us that we can't see through it. Even when you're journaling, you'll miss it.
Sure.
Because it's like, no, well, this is what happened. I yelled at my kid, so I'm a bad parent. And that is true, right? You feel that. You feel the truth of that, but it's not true. But sometimes it takes somebody telling you that's not true. You were hungry, and that's a different story. And so yeah, it can, having somebody like digest your thoughts for you or organize your thoughts for you as you just spew them out. That's the cool thing about a coach, right? Is like you just go and spew, and the coach is listening for certain things that are going to help you identify where you're saying your story is reality when it truly is just a story.
It's one of the ultimate pay for someone to do this for you services, because instead of you figuring all of that out, you literally just get to word vomit and they get to help you make sense of it.
It's really not so different than like your mechanic, right? You're like, hey, the car's not working. Here's my car. Fix it, right? The coach does the same thing. It's like, it feels like my brain's not working. Help me sort through my thoughts. And the coach, because they understand how thoughts work, is able to say, sure, so these go here, these go here. This is what we need to focus on today. Here's what I'm hearing you repeat. Right? So it really is, if you've ever had one of those situations where you're like, if I just had a professional to give me some direction. We had this early on in our parenting. There was a season where we were like, if we just knew, we didn't even know who to ask. It was like, we just knew who to ask for guidance, we would ask them because we knew we needed outside eyes to our story.
Yeah, that's right. So if you're interested in coaching, you know where to find me, ColemanHousefield.com. Check it out, and I'd love to help you make sense of the stories you're telling yourself. So moving on to once you've been able to bring the story to the surface, so it's no longer unconscious to you, right? It's now something you're aware of. Interesting. I think I tell myself that I'm a bad dad regularly. I think that's a story I rehearse. I think it's a story I believe, right? So now you have awareness through hiring a coach, through doing the journaling thought download. This is where the transformation can happen because your identity is built from repeated stories. So think about these phrases because this is super, super important when you think about the stories you tell yourself. I'm the kind of person who, fill in the blank. People like me do and say things like this. What would you fill in the blank with? That will actually tell you a lot about the stories that you're telling yourself. If the story changes, your identity changes, right? So here's an example. I'm someone who struggles in relationships. Maybe that was your old identity. Well, there's a new story you could tell yourself. Something like, I'm someone who is learning how to build healthy relationships. Notice how it doesn't deny what might be true today, which is you are not very good at it. That's okay. We all start somewhere as it pertains to being good at relationships. Most of us start at the not very good part. So notice how that is a small shift, but it's a huge impact for how you show up. If you believe I'm someone who is learning how to build healthy relationships, then you will actually apply yourself to learning those skills, to listening to podcasts, to reading books, to hiring coaches, to meeting with a therapist, whatever it takes, to getting a mentor, surrounding yourself with people who are in relationships that you admire and respect. Versus, I'm someone who struggles in relationships, well, where are you supposed to go from there?
Relationship fails.
That's a dead end, right? There's nowhere that you can go from there. So this is where you get to make a shift. Once you know the story that you are telling yourself, then you get to ask yourself, okay, but who do I want to be? What story would I like to tell about this? That's true, still true. It doesn't deny the facts.
No.
But it fuels you, it motivates you to show up differently.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. So we'll wrap this up because I feel like we've touched on a lot and there's a lot here to kind of mull over. But right now, what story about your past are you still rehearsing that might not actually be true? Or maybe it's true, but it's not helpful. And like we talked about before, taking that story and asking yourself what else could be true and helpful. And I'll just give a small example. I do this with my kids all the time when we meet like a new math lesson and they go through that first lesson and they get part of the problems wrong, and they always are like, oh, I hate math, I suck at math, I'm not good at this. And I'm like, wait, you're not supposed to. I'm like, you're supposed to get them wrong. This is a new concept. The goal is to do them more than once so that you figure it out, right? So their perspective and my perspective of the same math problem or the same math lesson is different because I'm choosing to believe a different story. I'm choosing to believe that they're supposed to get them wrong because they're learning something new. And often they're coming in expecting themselves to know something new that they've never learned before. And we do this as adults in our own life. So what are you saying in your story that you think is true, and what else could be true and helpful?
And by the way, if you are someone who doesn't spend a lot of time in the past, you don't think about the past, you primarily live in the present, or you primarily live in the future, and you may be getting to the end of this podcast and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool, but I don't really think about the past. I don't really worry about that stuff. I don't really blah, 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 blah. It does not mean you're telling yourself great stories.
Yeah.
Right?
We were going to wrap up, but I'm like, here we are. Let's go deeper into that. So Coleman's a 7 on the Enneagram, which is very future focused. I'm a 1 on the Enneagram, which means I tend to be like here in the present moment. So neither one of us is highly dwelled on the past.
It doesn't matter. Because you are telling yourself stories unconsciously today in this present moment.
That are based on the past.
That are often based on experiences you've had in the past.
Yep. That's all your brain has to work with.
Yeah.
Unless you practice some future focus activities, which is a whole nother thing. But
that's an advanced skill.
Yeah. That's right now, likely that's all your brain has to work with. So know that, like, don't dismiss this if you're like, I don't dwell on the past. I just move forward and move up. Like, you don't actually, don't. All the time.
If you feel stuck or frustrated or disappointed in any area of your life, the reality is there's a 90% chance that you are telling yourself a story unconsciously, and that story is what has you stuck. That story is what has you disappointed. That story is what has you frustrated. Doesn't matter if you think about the past.
Right. And ultimately, hopefully you receive this as good news. Good news that you can take all your power back from your past by telling yourself a different story about what happened. Just like for me, I'm working on taking my power back from the past to tell myself a different story this semester. So I hope you join me on this journey of rewriting our memories.